your mind's just zoning out, and all of a sudden you felt like an adrenaline rush of happiness for like a split second. You ever feel that?
Yes, absolutely.
And it only happened a couple times, correct?
It's happened a handful of times, but they've been separated by a number of years, of course.
Yes. All right. So I believe that when that happens, your endorphins in your brain are released, and that energy goes somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe if that happened to him on the swing set, that energy got soaked up, and it holds it like a big giant storage battery. And the same thing, how residual energy acts on.
So, in talking about, this residual type of energy holding itself in one place, at what point in your opinion or research do you think that the sentience is kind of removed from this? Or do you think that maybe that energy that was there initially and created that experience isn't even aware that there's a residual haunting?
That's tough.
Mm-hmm.
Because where do you separate the two types of energy? I don't know.
That's quite the question, though. Yeah.
I know that I've asked you before if there's, you think if there's residual energy, that can there be, an intelligent haunting there? Can two energies exist on the same plane in the same area?
Well, given, Dolores Cannon's interpretation of, possession in any way, shape, or form, she's always said that, you can't really have a spirit come into your body, right? So we were kind of talking about that a little bit earlier. The influence is there, of course, but when you talk about something like, let's say an inanimate object like Robert the Doll, okay, I have a hard time looking at pictures of this doll without feeling something, hitting my solar plexus in a very negative sort of way. What are your thoughts on, dolls that have some sort of sentience? And yeah, you can put Annabelle in there as well. But I mean, for some reason, Robert the Doll has always been a strong focus for paranormal investigators.
I know that's where they came up with the idea for Chucky. But I don't believe in all that.
Do you think there's anything to it at all?
Isn't Robert the Doll that took place in the late 1800s? The little boy said that the doll told him to kill people or something?
Yes. Well, I mean, to begin with, yeah. I mean, he would, be talking to it as if it were a real person, and yet it was still an inanimate object. And, this doll at first seemed to kind of play along and would move occasionally from one location to the next. And then the next thing you knew, the little boy would be sleeping, and this thing would crawl up the blankets and onto the chest and, hold itself on the chest the way that you would picture some sort of succubus or, another entity that would fall under that type of description.
I believe the kid had schizophrenia. And we just didn't know back then.
Well, I mean, if it was isolated to only that one person, I might, kind of err on the same opinion. But that doll has moved on, through history and had, many owners that actually purported the same activity.
I don't know.
No, that's a safe answer.
It could just be the way that they're feeling. Maybe they think that, so they believe it. Kind of like Salem witch trials. How do we know that they were actually witches, or these kids didn't have seizures and we just didn't know what it was back then? So they automatically accused that woman, the nanny, of being a witch, and now it created this mass hysteria. Now everyone that looked different was, assumed to be a witch.
And the majority, keep in mind, of those accusations were based on biases or, hatred for your neighbor or, some sort of feud that was happening between individuals or families, and they would accuse each other one way or another. And the only way to test was, go by the system that they had come up with, as inhumane as it was. But it's interesting. I'm not really resolved either. Go ahead.
So it's the same thing with the doll. They believe that, so they actually think that, something's going on here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That might be the case. It really might be the case. We just don't know. But I do know that Robert the Doll is, I think, encased in glass somewhere, and
yes,
with plenty of warning signs around it not to touch the thing. So there's some seriousness to this, right? And Annabelle.
Also,
yep, go ahead.
You also got to take into consideration in the late 1800s, spirituality, Ouija boards and all that was at its peak.
That's right.
Very at its peak at that time. So people believed in that.
That is true. That is true. But if that were the case, and it was solely within that time period, I wonder why that notion has been, carried through the last century, 20th century. I mean, I don't know, man.
The legend,
Yeah, maybe. God knows what, Ed Warren had actually experienced when he took, Annabelle the doll back home out of that house for the first time, and the motor dies and he gets into an accident and all this stuff ensues. We have to take it with a grain of salt, I think. But, unfortunately, some of these people that have had these experiences, they're not around anymore to sort of defend that opinion of what may have occurred.
Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, I heard about that. It's locked up in a glass case. You can't touch it, or you're going to get cursed.
Well, I mean, I don't know. Would you take the risk?
No, because if a coincidence happens, then people are going to say, well, look, Harry, you shouldn't have touched it all.
Well, then it would still kind of disprove or strengthen the opposite side of your opinion in respect to maybe what would be there. That would be kind of interesting, although you might reap some repercussions, right?
Yeah.
I don't know, man. Again, it's something that's always fascinated me. I've always kept it in the back of my mind and wondered, why do I feel so weird when I look at that one particular doll? Yeah, I don't care about Annabelle or any of the other ones that, people purport to have something going on. Here's one for you, too. Ready? Let's see. Some years ago, must have been like 4 or 5 years ago, I was watching a YouTube channel. I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but they were opening a Dibu box, right? And, there were plenty of these unboxings back in, 4 or 5 years ago. People were buying off of eBay or, some other place and, just opening it up. Yeah. This kid started experiencing, like, pictures falling off the wall behind him and lights going off, and next thing you know, there were doors slamming, and it's to the point where he actually had evacuated the house. And once he got out, he could see the lights going on and off up in the upper floors. Yeah, and one could say possibly this might be some sort of form of entertainment. But at the same time, maybe one of these instances are really true,
Maybe.
I don't know. That one kind of captivated me too. And he had filmed a follow-up to that where he went back to the house, and this was after, several days that he stayed at his brother's house or something along those lines. And I think he still experienced some slight paranormal activity from opening that box. I don't know. There has to be something to intention, right? So if you imbue some sort of object or, ritual box of some sort with intention, maybe that's what plays out. I don't know.
Well, that could fall into the theory of, objects holding, storing energy, too.
Okay, that's true.
Yeah.
That's quite true. Well, I think there's an aspect of that, right? There has to be. Some sort of longevity. It brings me back to, going to that graveyard out in Douglas, and that was the first time I actually saw these full-figured apparitions, and one of them kind of blew right through me, and I fell backwards. Buddy of mine was right behind, was able to catch me, pick me back up. Just the experience itself was so surreal that today it's clear.
I think I did see that video on your channel.
Yeah, there was a good one I put up on that once I could go back to the graveyard.
Now, that's one near the power lines, right?
Yes. Which, again, here you go. Power lines. I mean, not directly over the graveyard, but, right in the vicinity. That's curious. Very, very curious. Well, I mean, I remember hearing some years ago, and, I think there's a little bit of evidence for this, but nobody really knows why. I mean, a lot of UFOs have been sighted above different power lines or power grids and so forth. They always say, they're taking energy from, the power displays and so forth. I don't know. I mean, if paranormal activity and perhaps some of the UFOs, everything's sort of laying in the field of electricity. Again, this might make sense. If we kind of look at paranormal activity and say there's an electric foundation to this that's inherent and intrinsic to the universe itself, which is something we don't understand in the way of that aspect. Again, we might have a different interpretation of what paranormal activity is and perhaps get one step closer to solidifying the reality of that, even if it's not something you experience every day. Now, look, people go to sleep every night, okay, and they wake up and they continue through their day, and at the end of the day, they go to sleep, and that's it. Not everyone dreams, or when you do, maybe the next night you don't dream. So, like paranormal activity, in the same way, you might experience it sometimes, but just because you only dream, 2 times a week doesn't mean that dreaming doesn't exist.
Right.
So.
Well, the thing too about the UFOs, in order for them to travel at the speed of light, you need a wormhole. And if these power lines, these high T's, are creating a vortex, that are perfect wormhole right there.
It's curious. Sorry, go ahead.
These vessels might be able to find these wormholes in key areas of the Earth.
You might be onto something with that, but I think, about a lot of near-death experiences that, people, have that experience, they come back and they're dictating what went on. One of the first things they say is, I stepped out of space and time, or I've stepped out of time completely. So if we're not talking about physical distance, and we're not talking about physical time that takes to traverse a certain distance, perhaps, in the larger, view of the universe, there's something that's very akin to what we would call a wormhole or some sort of portal that way, and yet it's again, very natural within the construct of the universe. I mean, the universe itself is enormous. We have no idea exactly how big it is, but there may be species out there that realize that, wow, it's a lot bigger than anyone might be able to calculate, and yet we still need to get from point A to point B. So how do we do that? It would make sense that the universe would naturally create some sort of shortcut, I think, and it's just not something we're aware of entirely as a collective.
Yes.
Yeah. Quite curious, my friend. I mean, you go you go into the concept of time travel. I think, obviously based on what they were doing at the Montauk Project and a lot of these other black projects, we talk about the traditional folding over of matter and space and time. And what that does, obviously, is kind of creates that horseshoe shape wherein each end can be connected through a wormhole, and you don't have to go around the perimeter of that manifestation. It goes directly from point A to point B. Mm-hmm. That's probably the most simple explanation that we can give, even though we find that to be somewhat complex in respect to our physics and what we understand. Whereas there are other species of extraterrestrials that have certainly traversed that avenue for millennia, maybe billions of years, we don't know. And yet there's a connection with that particular vibrational highway where
definitely.
Yeah, people talk about extraterrestrials and the paranormal sort of existing in the same space, and you're not really sure which one you have. I mean, there was a guy that I talked to for a couple of years before things sort of went off the deep end for him, that in his apartment, he was getting activity almost every single night. And when he'd leave for work, he was getting activity during the day while he wasn't there. And it could be shadows, it could be orbs, it could be things moving about. He talked about seeing shadow figures that looked like extraterrestrials, very namely the Greys. I believed that he believed what he was seeing, and I don't necessarily to this day have anything that surmounted saying he was wrong. Like that there was a logical explanation for all of that, because we really ripped it apart as best we could, and he was at the forefront of that. He wanted to know the truth, whether it was something anomalous or something that we could look at in a different light and say, well, we can explain this.
Yeah.
In the Bridgewater Triangle, we talk about extraterrestrials, or UFOs at least, appearing in the sky. Are there any stories of extraterrestrials actually landing in, the Bridgewater Triangle at any point? Anything in the history?
Yes. I said this in the documentary, in Rehoboth, or there was 2 UFOs that were landing. I think on Route 44, and then they took off. I think that was in the 60s.
On the highway.
No, Route 44 is not really. Well, it's not a highway, but
okay, yeah, that's maybe the wrong definition of it.
There has been the report in the late 70s of that diamond-shaped UFO, the home plate, that the 2 radio spokes seen that came close to landing. That was actually above Route 24, and actually Route 24 is on top of a graveyard. They actually just moved just the headstones, and they placed them across the street, but the bodies are still underneath Route 24, right through the heart of the triangle.
Do you have any idea when they might have put together that construct, when they paved out Route 44?
You mean Route 24?
Sorry, Route 24.
No, but I could find out.
I'd just be curious. Is it colonial gravestones or something much older?
I'm not sure. Because I do know Route 24 is fairly new. Might have been built maybe in the maybe even the 50s, the 1950s, 1960s. But what's interesting is wherever there's these UFO reports, people have claimed to have shifted through time in that same area. They claim that they went through some kind of wormhole.
Well, there was an experience that you had dictated to me, some time ago. I think it was someone that had reached out to you or one of your friends who had taken an exit off.
Yes.
Okay. Right. What was that again?
He was driving down Route 24, and right before he would get off on the 106 exit, he would see the sign, 106 West Bridgewater, and he would normally travel under the bridge. And when he traveled under the bridge, he noticed the sign for his exit was gone. It wasn't there, and he found himself now in Bridgewater, 4.5 miles down.
Huh. That's so wild.
He said that the radio was playing, it didn't skip, nothing. And he's not the only one, though. The very first documented UFO report in the United States was in the 1600s on the Charles River. 3 men were rowing a boat, and they saw this object in the sky darting back and forth from Charlestown back to Boston, and then they found themselves like a mile upstream instantly.
Well, that in itself, I think, we have a lot of reports of, people being abducted during those times. They have the missing time, they have the missing distance. My friend Alex Oyen, he had been on one side of a body of water or a stream of sort. He and a friend, and next thing you knew, it's like that. They're walking on the opposite side, going the opposite direction. And there's a whole story that goes into what Alex remembers about that moment, but his friend, I don't think had the same recollection, and yet there they were going north one moment and south the next, on opposite sides of the body of water. I find that so curious. When we talk about abduction sequences, now his wasn't necessarily extraterrestrial; it was Bigfoot. Yeah, very curious story where he talked about coming into this. I wouldn't say it's a dimension, but some type of different reality where everything was so bright. Now, a lot of times we hear near-death experiencers talk about, going into gardens that, have flowers where the light kind of illuminates from within the flower rather than light reflecting on and shining back. It comes from within. And this was sort of how he described that. And his best word to, talk about what this forest looked like was avatar. He said it had a huge high canopy, enormous leaves, huge trees, and everything was vibrant from within. And 3 Bigfoot-type creatures approached him, arms crossed, and when they got close, they started talking to him saying, hey, you were in the wrong place at the wrong time. We had to relocate you. And within that, you're only here for a short moment, and as it goes, they all kind of like nodded in one way, shape, or form around him, and boom, that's it. He was back. He's the only story that I've heard of Bigfoot abducting somebody, and it wasn't even seemingly intentional outside of, hey, you might have been walking through something that Sasquatch energy was doing, but you couldn't be there. It was, sort of conflicting with that energy. Very curious. Very curious indeed. I just wonder. Yeah, go ahead.
They say whenever the Sasquatch appears, there's like these floating lights.
I've heard that too. I wonder if those are the elementals that might be around Sasquatch. I think that Sasquatch is connected intimately to the elemental world, especially if there's an interdimensional character to that particular entity. It would have to somewhere sit within that. Now, many people will sit here and say, the elementals, this is sort of a fantasy. Brian Froud did a great job, talking about fairies and whatever. Now, I took this seriously to a certain degree when I was younger until it became much more of a reality for me when I was in my late teen years, early 20s, and my mother had a couple friends down in southern Connecticut who actually owned this beautiful lavish garden. Now, they're both very spiritual folks, two ladies in their, I think 80s, maybe early 90s, something along those lines, so they were older. But they tended and cared for this, and they'd give tours and what have you. Well, they woke up one morning, and knowing that there's a portal on the property, and then they would work with these elementals, something had come through the portal and destroyed all the flowers overnight. It didn't seem like it was a logical move for any animal to come in and just, bushwhack things down, or, a person to come in and sabotage this garden. It didn't make sense for that. So they ended up sealing off the portal, and don't ask me how they did that, but this is how the story goes. And they were able to rebuild with the fairy energy that was there, that garden once again. Now, obviously they being in their later years, some time ago here, we're talking, over 20 years. I sincerely doubt that they're still with us. But within that, I wonder if that garden is still there and protected by those elementals. But again, I digress here, and bringing it back to Sasquatch and the elementals, there must be a connection.
Yeah.
Are there any reports of people seeing fairies or anything within that elemental realm down in Bridgewater?
No.
Outside of the Puckwudgies, of course, right?
Yeah.
He never got back to you, did he? What was it, Bob? What the hell was his name?
Ooh.
The guy that saw the Puckwudgie out walking with his dog, Bill. Bill.
Oh, Bill Russo.
Yes.
He did. He lives in Florida, though, now. He doesn't live up here.
Okay.
Because I was under the impression he lived just, in Rainham. I was going to give him an interview, but said that he lives in Florida. He can do one on Skype, but at the time he was having some denture work done, and he didn't want the camera to show, some missing teeth. So I said, it's all right. I'll use a picture. I'll just narrate your story.
Okay. Well, I mean, he could have at least given commentary, but if he wasn't comfortable, then that's what it is.
But he saw one near High Tees too.
He what?
He saw the Puckwudgie near the High Tees.
Really?
Yep.
I don't think I knew that.
Yep. Cynthia Drive. That's where he said he lived.
So did he lay claim to 2 sightings or 1?
Just that one.
Okay. That's what I thought. Puckwudgies. Yeah, these are one of the elemental groups that it can be disputed, but because the legend in lore is so thick, it's hard to dispute that. Now, that being said, it's not that we have a plethora of sightings with these things, right? It's not like hundreds of people go out and witness this or experience these Puckwudgies in one way or another, but the ones that we have are so formidable. It's hard to disprove them. It's really hard.
Right. Well,
that's weird.
And also, it was weird too when I did the documentary. He said, I'll give you my address. Just please do not, post the address, on your documentary. He goes, because I did it in the original one. And he goes, my son lives at the house, and before you know it, he said my son witnessed people, showing up, taking pictures of his house, the property. So I said, fine. But now he's on this episode right in front of his house, showing people.
Contradictory. Yeah, well, listen, when they throw money at you, You know, I mean, it's a different story for some people, and that's unfortunate. I know how much these participants get paid on average, and it's decent, you know, in most cases. So I understand the lore, but God, that just kind of destroys the story. It reminds me of Amityville. Let me ask you about that real quick. I don't think we ever talked about Amityville, or the Amityville horror as it was marketed. What are your thoughts on the Lutz family that lived there and that whole story that unraveled? I mean, I imagine you're familiar with it.
Yeah, he had a drug problem.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So who's to say if he was really possessed or if, the house was haunted? I guess the history of the land, there was a guy that tortured natives right there where the house was built.
Well, that would add to some bad energy to the land at least.
But, the movie, though, actually, and they said this, they, portrayed it as, some big-ass type of, haunting, and it wasn't. The movie, a lot of the things in the movie were far-fetched. The movie, they didn't film it in New York. A lot of it was taken at a house in New Jersey.
Well, I mean, for the filming, I understand why they would maybe, pull that set, from a different location or whatever the case may be. But, when you talk to George Lutz, and you talk about the DeFeo family that obviously had ended in tragedy from, I think his name was William, if I'm not mistaken. God, it's been so long since I've looked into this case. They felt that, there was a lot of this. Okay, everything had sort of unfolded the way you saw it in the movie, or if you read the books that, that have been put out, that's how it was a very linear sort of experiences where things amped up in a logarithmic fashion in a very short period of time and affected everybody. Now, it's been explicitly said, I think by the, it wasn't the publisher, but somebody else that was very close to them that was working to create this story for, the general public, that, over several bottles of wine, they kind of embellished this to such a degree where I think it's not even recognizable anymore. But if that house actually held any sort of activity at any point in time, that's significant, but overshadowed by the hype that the Lutz family, obviously had decided to bank on.
Yeah.
That's unfortunate.
Well, the whole DeFeo family, they were, the father was abusive, and I think Robert DeFeo just snapped, and, that's why he shot everyone.
Shit, it was Rob? Sorry.
Robert DeFeo. I think it was Robert DeFeo, yeah.
Well, Robert, William, okay, yep, okay. Well, going into the drug thing, right, you say that that's why he snapped, and, in his...
Yeah, he had a major drug problem.
In his statements and confessions, he talked about being taken over by something. Obviously, this is very classic when you take something of such a substance where that's the key. That's true. A lot of people that have a drug problem say that they were possessed. They believe that it was in possession. Now, the only thing that turns my head a little bit is that when you look into Rob's interviews while he's in jail, and, we're talking, years after him being incarcerated, he's obviously still holding on to the notion that, he was possessed in one way, shape, or form. But he also adds that he had been harassed and haunted to a very large degree in his cell. Now, the reason this is so interesting to me is because there's another inmate who, did some things, did his time, and is now a big YouTuber, or it has been for a little while now. And this guy also mentioned, outside of anything paranormal, he's not into that necessarily, but he mentioned that he was haunted while he was in his jail cell too. And it actually had to do with the people that he had offed at one point, whereas I think DeFeo really was kind of experiencing something more etheric in respect to the source. Again, I can't really tell you what that is, but, I think it's really interesting. Of course, the Amityville Horror is one of the most known, and oddly enough, loved, cases that have ever come about within the paranormal field.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it was mainly, a lot of it had to do with Hollywood, but yeah.
Mm-hmm. But, again, how this all came to mind is that there were a lot of people that were going over to that property or standing across the street, pulling up, taking pictures, and, obviously the property owners didn't want anything to do with that. And I believe they've changed the house significantly over periods of time, just to kind of hide the fact that that's what it was. Now, if you were given the chance, would you step into the house?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yep. Yeah, I don't see why not. I mean, so many paranormal investigators already have done it, but it's sort of that, golden apple at the top of the tree. I mean, very few are ever going to be able to reach it. But, it might be interesting to investigate one day.
I don't think you can go there anymore.
No, you can't. Obviously, it would have to be under, certain communication and permission that would be granted. But, outside of them selling this house and they're becoming, different owners, like the people who own SK Pierce Mansion, they say, let's turn this into a tourist site, or the Lizzie Borden house. I don't think we'll ever really get the opportunity to set foot in that house down in, Rhode Island, I think, right?
No, New York.
Oh, Jesus Christ. Well, Long Island, right?
I don't think it's Long Island, no. I think it's upstate New York. I know it's on Ocean Ave.
Yeah, I'll have to look at it again. But, regardless. Fuck's sake, man.
Yeah, I don't think we'll ever get able to go there. They even changed the look of the house. It no longer has that colonial split to back look.
I don't remember if they changed the actual address. They may have too. I mean, there was a whole undertaking that they went through the effort to do to keep people from going any further with that physically. You can always watch the movies, you can get into the books, you can get into the lore. I'm sure that the Warrens talk about it extensively in their body of works, but at the end of the day, that's all we're ever going to get. And DeFeo is now dead. He passed away, not too long ago, believe it or not. I think it was within the last 10 years or so. And, everything eventually comes to an end.
Yeah.
Fuck's sake, we have some good conversations, don't we?
Yeah.
God, you can't...
Salem courts, they don't fucking play up there. You will get arrested for trespassing. They will take it to trial.
I mean, with a tourist destination like that, I'm not surprised.
Yeah, you just step foot in a cemetery after dark, they're cuffing you.
I remember back in the day, being up in Uxbridge, plenty of cemeteries, right, even outside of the center of town. The apprehension the guy I worked with at the time, and I shared, just going into the graveyards at night, we're like, oh my God, were the cops going to come?
Did you hear about the kid that got arrested just a couple days ago out there?
No.
He wore on Friday the 13th.
Yeah.
They arrested him for wearing a Jason mask outside near a school. They had to put the whole school in lockdown. They detained him. They found that he was no threat, but they arrested him.
Why did they just arrest him for trespassing?
No, they arrested him for disturbing the peace, and there was some other charge about causing a school to go into lockdown.
Oh, shit.
Which I find ridiculous. And there's the Uxbridge Police Department page on, Facebook, and of course everybody's saying, "Oh, way to go, way to protect our babies." Some people were bashing this guy, saying, "What a sicko," and I stood up for him. Because I don't think that's right. And the guy that was arrested, actually, he personally messaged me, and he goes, "Thank you for having half a brain."
Wow.
He showed me the mask that he was wearing. It was a fucking COVID mask. A COVID mask that looked like Jason's mask.
What?
Had that design on it. And he said that they got their panties in a bunch. He said that the kids were probably scared because the teacher made it seem more than what it was.
That would have to be what it is, yeah.
And he was saying that this is horse shit. And he's just an average guy. You go on his profile, you see that he met Kane Harbor.
Yep.
I think that's his name, like Jason. He's just a fan of, horror movies. He said, I was just trying to be festive. And that's what happened.
Yeah, I want to chalk it up to Uxbridge being a small town, but come on, you got to exercise some common sense. I mean, the guy wasn't walking around with a fake gun or a fake knife, at least.
Right.
He didn't even have a hockey stick, for God's sake. So, I mean, he ain't no Casey Jones.
It's just, I don't know, this day and age, because I guess all the school shootings, I guess.
Oh, that's 100% what it is. I mean, you can't get, within 1,000 feet of a school without, somebody having eyes on you. In one respect, that's good. But again, you got to exercise certain discretion when it comes to law enforcement and say, okay, who is this guy? You know what I mean? He doesn't have any weapon on him. Well, what kind of threat is he really? He's wearing a COVID mask that looks like a Jason mask. Come on. We've seen people wearing these different designed COVID masks that look like aliens, or they look like, another sort of horror character or something along those lines. It's so stupid.
Right. It's. I asked myself, what law did he break? Because what if it was a 12-degree day and he was walking by the school with a ski mask on? There's no law against that.
Yeah, he could certainly have that, but if they wanted to take him in and, have some sort of trial on this, I mean, I think he could beat this easily enough, right?
Oh, yeah, I think the case will be a no, definitely.
Yeah. So, poor guy. Just trying to be festive on Friday the 13th,
Yeah, he's only 35 years old, first time ever getting in trouble.
That's so stupid. Unfortunate, too. Now he's going to have a record for a bit, but, under what pretense? Oh, vey, mate.
It's like you said, the small towns, they have nothing to do.
That's it. It's the most excitement that town's seen in years.
I live in Brockton, so it's a big city. Not a big city, but it's a high crime rated city.
Right.
And you stayed at one of the famous motels out there, Motel 6.
Oh, that place sucked. Yep.
Yeah. And out here, police won't even arrest you for a misdemeanor.
They have other things to do. Other things that are more important.
Yeah, they won't. They'll only show up if it's an emergency or if there's a shooting, and that's it.
And that makes sense to me.
Of course, police have a bad rap, but that's what it is.
Yeah, well, again, you know what I mean? When you have a larger area that you're trying to control and you're trying to, kind of look at what matters most. Are you going to, respond to a call with, 3 kids smoking weed by the flagpole in the center of town? Or are you going to go to that stabbing victim who just got hit right outside of a, Walmart down the street? I mean, where are you going to go?
Right. Well, it's not just that. The police out here, they're freaking lazy. Like I told you, I used to patrol with the Operation Archangels.
Oh, that's right.
We witnessed somebody smoking crack. We told the cop about it. We said, oh, he's smoking crack over there. The cop turns around and goes, yeah, I'm sure he is. Look at the area we're in. And he just sat there on his fucking phone, texting. He didn't.
It's not high priority.
No. And, I seen a guy and a girl. They were beating each other up. Boyfriend and girlfriend. We had to break it up.
Mm-hmm.
We told a cop that was sitting there about it, and he goes, well, I just arrested them 2 the other day, and, they're back out here doing it again, so it's pointless.
Oh, for God's sake. That's a little helpless there. I think, it comes to domestic violence or any type of violence, there should be some sort of repercussion for that, but it can put you in the mentality that they have out there, Yeah. Yeah. And you think about bigger cities like New York or Los Angeles or, something along those lines, Philadelphia, they're all making calls by the moment.
Yeah, Boston back in the day was wicked bad.
This is true.
And now Brockton takes the cake. Brockton, and I think it's Lynn, the most 2 dangerous cities out in Massachusetts.
I remember doing hip-hop shows out in New Bedford. And I was skeeved out,
Yep.
Lowell, same thing.
Lowell, yep.
There was a guy, boxer, some sort of amateur, but he was really well known, got shot right in the face right outside my dorm.
Oh.
Gang related, just broad daylight, pulled up to the stoplight, pow, that was it.
Yep.
I don't know how those cities are today, but I imagine they're not too much different.
Oh, yeah, no, we witnessed a shooting a couple of years ago at the Cape Verdean bar.
Jesus, man.
Yep. And it's funny, too, because we were posted up across the street, and I said to everyone, let's go post up across the street on the other side, because this crowd is getting really big, and there's only 5 of us. And it's a good thing we crossed the street, because right after we heard pop, 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 this guy right out in front of everyone was shooting 3 victims.
It only takes a second.
Yeah.
And these guys have hot heads, quick to use a firearm, rather than center the dispute.
They caught him, and they raided his house, and they found all kinds of drugs, and they gave him a bail, probably because they wanted to follow him and see who his, supplier was.
That would make sense, too.
While he was out on bail, he got shot, so the case was terminated.
Generally, that's how it happens, right? Violence begets violence. Pardon me. And it's a sad cycle. But, I mean, eventually, one day we'll figure it out. You and I will be long gone, but, eventually we'll figure it out.
I give the rub of the night. Everyone, the whole crowd was like, "Where's the angels? Why didn't you stop it?" And we're like, we're not bulletproof, lady. Come on.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure, but I'm pretty certain you probably weren't packing.
No.
Yeah.
No. Hey, we're trained to disarm a gun if it's up close, not 20 feet away.
Right, dude. Right. Good Lord.
Yes.